The Arizona sun beat down like a furnace as Eleanor Hayes stepped off the dusty stagecoach in the summer of 1883, her carefully pinned hair already wilting beneath her bonnet, and realized with a sinking heart that accepting her aunt's invitation to help run the Copper Ridge Ranch might have been the most foolish decision of her 22 years. The heat struck her like a physical blow, so different from the mild summers of Pennsylvania where she had grown up. Eleanor had imagined the West as a land of opportunity and adventure, but standing in the blazing courtyard of the ranch with her heavy traveling dress clinging to her skin, she wondered if she would survive her first afternoon. Her Aunt Martha had written that the ranch needed help with the bookkeeping and correspondence, tasks Eleanor excelled at, but nothing in those letters had prepared her for the brutal reality of the desert climate. "You must be Miss Hayes," a weathered woman in practical cotton said, approaching with a concerned expression. "I am Mrs. Donnelly, the cook. Your aunt is out checking the north pasture, but she will return by supper. Let me show you to your room so you can freshen up." Eleanor nodded, trying to smile, but the world seemed to shimmer and tilt around her. She had eaten little on the long journey, her stomach unsettled by the constant jostling of the stagecoach. Now the combination of exhaustion, hunger, and the oppressive heat created a dangerous cocktail in her system. She picked up her smallest bag, leaving the trunk for later, and followed Mrs. Donnelly toward the main house. They crossed the open courtyard, and Eleanor felt her vision begin to narrow. The sun seemed impossibly bright, reflecting off the pale dirt and the whitewashed walls of the buildings. Her corset, perfectly acceptable in Philadelphia, felt like an iron cage constricting her breathing. She pressed a gloved hand to her forehead, feeling the moisture there despite the dry air that seemed to leach all dampness away. "Just a bit further, dear, Mrs. Donnelly said, but her voice sounded distant as though coming from the end of a long tunnel. Eleanor took another step, then another. The bag slipped from her fingers. She heard it hit the ground with a thud that seemed very far away. The blue sky above began to darken at the edges, closing in like curtains drawn across a stage. She tried to speak, to call out, but her tongue felt thick and useless in her mouth. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the ground rushing up to meet her face, and then nothing at all. When consciousness began to return, Eleanor became aware of several sensations at once. There was blessed coolness against her face, a gentle rhythmic movement of air, and the sound of water being poured. She felt herself being cradled slightly, her head supported by something firm yet yielding. The scent of leather, sage, and clean sweat filled her nostrils, distinctly masculine and oddly comforting. "There now, easy does it," a deep voice said above her, touched with concern and a slight drawl that marked him as a man born to this harsh land. "Mrs. Donnelly, bring that water here quick." Eleanor's eyelids fluttered open, and she found herself staring up into the most striking pair of gray eyes she had ever seen. They belonged to a man who appeared to be in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and dark hair that fell across his forehead beneath a pushed-back hat. He was fanning her with his hat, the movement creating the cooling breeze she had felt, and his other arm supported her shoulders, keeping her head elevated off the scorching ground. "Welcome back," he said, and despite the gravity of the situation, there was a hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. "You gave us quite a scare, miss. Do not try to sit up yet, Mrs. Donnelly appeared with a tin cup of water, and the cowboy took it carefully. "Just small sips now," he instructed, bringing the cup to Eleanor's lips with surprising gentleness for such work-roughened hands. "Not too fast, or you will make yourself sick." The water was cool and tasted faintly of metal, but it was the most wonderful thing Eleanor had ever experienced. She sipped obediently, feeling strength begin to return to her limbs. As her head cleared, embarrassment flooded through her. Here she was, on her first day at the ranch, collapsed in the dirt and being tended to like an invalid. "I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I do not know what happened, I just suddenly felt so faint." "Nothing to apologize for," the cowboy said firmly. "This heat is brutal if you are not used to it, and I would wager you have been traveling for days without proper rest or food. Your body just gave out, that is all." He continued fanning her steadily with his hat, his gray eyes never leaving her face, as though monitoring every flicker of expression for signs of distress. "You are Eleanor, are you not?" He continued. "Martha's niece from back east. I am James Walcott, the foreman here at Copper Ridge. Your aunt has been talking about your arrival for weeks." Eleanor managed a weak nod, acutely aware that she was still resting against his arm but lacking the strength to move. "Please call me Eleanor, and thank you, Mr. Walcott. I feel like such a fool." "James," he corrected gently. "Out here we do not stand much on formality, and you are no fool. The desert has humbled men twice your size. Mrs. Donnelly, can you fetch some cool cloths? And maybe some bread if there is any in the kitchen." The cook hurried away, and James carefully helped Eleanor into a more upright sitting position, though he kept his arm around her shoulders for support. "Let us get you into some shade at least." "Can you stand if I help you?" Eleanor nodded, determined to salvage some shred of dignity, and James rose smoothly to his feet, bringing her up with him. Her legs wobbled alarmingly, and she would have fallen again if not for his strong arm around her waist. He guided her slowly across the courtyard to the porch of the main house, where the overhanging roof provided blessed shade. He settled her carefully into a wooden chair and knelt beside her, still fanning her with patient, steady strokes. "Better?" he asked, and Eleanor found herself captivated by the genuine concern in those gray eyes. There was no judgment there, no irritation at having his work interrupted, just honest worry for her welfare. "Much better," she said. "Thank you. You must think me terribly weak and silly coming out here so unprepared." "I think you are brave," James said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with her physical distress. "It takes courage to leave everything familiar and travel across the country to start fresh. Most people never take that kind of risk. Mrs. Donnelly returned with cool cloths and a plate of bread and cheese. James took one of the cloths, and with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his calloused hands and sun-weathered face, pressed it to Eleanor's forehead and the back of her neck. The coolness was heavenly, and she sighed in relief. "Eat something," he urged, indicating the food. "Just a little at first, you need to get your strength back." Eleanor took a small piece of bread and nibbled at it, suddenly ravenous. As the food settled in her stomach and the cool cloths brought down her temperature, she felt more like herself. James remained kneeling beside her chair, having retrieved his hat from the ground but still using it to fan her intermittently. She noticed the fine lines around his eyes, carved by years of squinting into the sun, and the capable strength evident in his frame. This was a man who knew hard work intimately, who had earned his position through skill and dedication rather than privilege or connections. "How long have you worked at Copper Ridge?" Eleanor asked, wanting to keep him talking. His voice was soothing, and she found herself curious about this man who had appeared like a guardian angel when she needed one most. "Going on 7 years now," James said. "I started as a regular ranch hand when I was 18, just after my father passed. Your aunt took a chance on me when other ranches would not, saw something in me, I suppose. She promoted me to foreman 3 years back when old Tom Hendricks retired." He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "Martha Hayes is one of the finest people I have ever known. She runs this ranch better than most men could, and she treats her workers fair. You come from good stock, Eleanor." "I barely know her," Eleanor admitted. She left Pennsylvania before I was born, married a rancher, and moved west. My mother spoke of her sometimes, but they lost touch over the years. When Aunt Martha wrote offering me a position, I was so surprised. But I had nothing holding me back east, no real prospects, and I wanted to see something of the world beyond the same gray streets I had known all my life. James nodded thoughtfully. The West has a way of calling to certain souls. It is not easy here. The land is harsh and life can be hard. But there is a freedom in it too, a sense that you can make something of yourself through your own efforts. He stood, offering her his hand. Think you can make it inside now. You should rest properly before dinner. Eleanor took his hand and rose, pleased to find her legs much steadier now. Yes, I think I can manage. Thank you again, James. I truly do not know what would have happened if you had not been there. Somebody would have helped you, James said modestly. It just happened to be me. But the way he looked at her suggested that he was glad it had been him, and Eleanor felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the heat. Mrs. Donnelly led Eleanor inside to a modest but clean room on the second floor. The whitewashed walls reflected what light came through the single window, and a simple iron bed covered with a patchwork quilt stood against one wall. Eleanor's trunk had already been brought up, and she was grateful to dig through it for something lighter to wear. I will bring some water for washing, Mrs. Donnelly said kindly. And perhaps you should lie down for a few hours before dinner. Martha will not expect you to do anything today except recover. Eleanor agreed gratefully, and once she had changed into a lighter cotton dress and sponged away the dust of travel, she lay down on the bed. Despite her embarrassing introduction to ranch life, she found herself smiling as she drifted toward sleep. James Walcott's concerned gray eyes and gentle hands stayed with her, and she wondered if perhaps coming to Arizona might prove more interesting than she had anticipated. She woke several hours later to find the fierce heat of afternoon had mellowed into early evening. The room was still warm but bearable, and through the window she could hear voices and the sounds of ranch life winding down for the day. Eleanor rose and tidied herself, brushing out her hair and pinning it up more loosely than she would have back east. When she descended the stairs, she followed the sound of conversation to a large dining room where several people were gathering for supper. Her Aunt Martha was instantly recognizable despite the years and distance. She had the same sharp blue eyes as Eleanor's mother, though her face was more lined and weathered by the sun. She wore practical clothing and her gray-streaked hair in a simple bun, but she carried herself with an authority that commanded respect. Eleanor. Martha crossed the room and embraced her niece warmly. Mrs. Donnelly told me what happened. I am so sorry, dear. I should have warned you more strongly about the heat and made sure someone met you with a wagon and plenty of water. James said you fainted right in the courtyard, you poor thing. I am fine now, Eleanor assured her, returning the embrace. It was my own fault for not being better prepared, but your foreman took excellent care of me. He was very kind. James is a good man, Martha agreed, and there was a note of particular fondness in her voice. One of the best I have ever known. Now come sit, you must be hungry. The dining room table could seat 12, and about half those places were filled. Eleanor was introduced to the ranch's key personnel who took their meals at the main house. There was Samuel Chen, who managed the horse breeding program Martha had started several years ago, and his wife Lily, who helped with the household management. There was Diego Mendoza, the head wrangler, a man in his 40s with laugh lines around his eyes and stories that kept everyone entertained. And there was James, who had cleaned up for dinner but still wore his work clothes, his dark hair damp as though he had dunked his head in the trough outside. He stood when Eleanor entered, and she noticed the other men followed suit out of respect. Good to see you on your feet again, Eleanor, James said. Feeling better? Much better, thanks to you. Eleanor replied, and she was pleased when Martha gestured for her to take the seat beside the foreman. Dinner was a hearty affair of beef stew, fresh bread, and vegetables from the kitchen garden. The conversation flowed easily, touching on ranch business, local news, and gentle teasing among people who clearly respected and liked one another. Eleanor found herself relaxing in a way she never had at the formal, stilted dinners of Philadelphia society. Here, people spoke their minds plainly, laughed freely, and treated one another with genuine warmth regardless of station or background. James was quieter than some of the others, but when he spoke, everyone listened. He had a dry wit that emerged occasionally, drawing surprised laughs, and Eleanor noticed that her aunt often looked to him for his opinion on various matters. It was clear that despite Martha's ownership of the ranch, she valued James's judgment highly and considered him an essential partner in running Copper Ridge. "So, Eleanor," Diego said, his accent a pleasant lilt, "your aunt tells us you will be helping with the business side of things. We desperately need better organization." "Martha is brilliant with the cattle and horses, but she hates paperwork." "Despise it," Martha confirmed cheerfully. "I can track 100 head of cattle by memory, but ask me to balance a ledger and I want to shoot something." Eleanor has training in bookkeeping and correspondence. She managed her father's medical practice records for years before he passed. "I am looking forward to being useful," Eleanor said, "though I admit I know nothing about ranching itself." "I have much to learn." "We will teach you," James said, and when Eleanor turned to look at him, she found him already watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "If you are interested, that is. Understanding the work helps with managing the books. You should ride out and see the operation, get a sense of how everything connects." "I would like that," Eleanor said, perhaps a bit too quickly because Martha smiled knowingly. "James can show you around tomorrow if you are feeling up to it," Martha suggested. "Start early before the worst heat of the day. Can you ride?" "I can," Eleanor confirmed, "though not with any great skill. I learned as a girl but have not ridden much in recent years." "We will find you a gentle mount," James promised, "and take things slow. No need to rush." After dinner, Martha showed Eleanor the small office where she would be working. It was chaos, with papers piled haphazardly, ledgers months out of date, and correspondence stacked in teetering towers. Eleanor felt a thrill of purpose looking at the disorder. This was work she could do, work she was good at, and it would allow her to contribute meaningfully to her aunt's enterprise. "I know it looks overwhelming," Martha said apologetically. "I kept meaning to get it organized, but there is always something more pressing with the actual ranch work." "It is perfect," Eleanor said honestly. "Give me a few weeks and I will have it all sorted out. We will know exactly where you stand financially, what the inventory is, everything." Martha squeezed her shoulder gratefully. "I knew bringing you here was the right decision. Now go get some rest. Tomorrow will come early." Eleanor did rest, falling asleep almost as soon as her head touched the pillow. She woke before dawn to the sound of roosters and the low murmur of men gathering for the day's work. She dressed quickly in her simplest dress and boots, braided her hair in a single plait down her back, and made her way downstairs to find breakfast already laid out in the dining room. James was there, eating quickly while discussing something with Diego. Both men stood when she entered, and James smiled, transforming his serious face again. "Morning, Eleanor. Sleep well." "Very well, thank you. I am ready for that tour if the offer still stands." "Absolutely. Eat something first, though." "We will be out for a few hours, and you need your strength, especially after yesterday." Eleanor filled a plate and ate while James finished his coffee and gave Diego instructions for the day's work. The easy authority in his voice confirmed what Eleanor had already sensed about him. He was a natural leader, someone men followed not out of fear but out of respect and trust. They walked together to the stable where Samuel was already at work. He had prepared 2 horses, a tall bay gelding for James and a smaller chestnut mare with kind eyes for Eleanor. "This is Rosie," Samuel said, stroking the mare's neck. "She is as gentle as they come. She will take good care of you." James helped Eleanor mount, his hands steadying her with that same gentleness he had shown the day before. Once she was settled in the saddle, he swung up onto his own horse with the easy grace of a man who had spent most of his life on horseback. They set out as the sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky with streaks of pink and gold. The ranch was vast, stretching across valley and hillside as far as Eleanor could see. James led her first to the nearest pastures where cattle grazed, explaining how they rotated the herds to prevent overgrazing and preserve the delicate desert vegetation. He pointed out landmarks, told her about the water sources that made ranching possible in this harsh environment, and spoke of the challenges they faced from drought, predators, and changing markets. Eleanor listened intently, fascinated not just by the information but by James himself. He spoke with deep knowledge and obvious love for the land and the work. This was not simply a job to him but a calling, a way of life he had chosen and embraced fully. There was poetry in the way he described the rhythm of the seasons, the satisfaction of seeing calves grow strong, the challenge of matching wits with the weather and the land. "Your aunt is building something special here," James said as they paused on a low hill overlooking the ranch. "She has vision and courage. Most ranchers are stuck in old ways, but Martha is always thinking ahead. The horse breeding program, for instance. That was her idea, and it is paying off beautifully. She treats her workers well, pays fair wages, and in return she gets loyalty and hard work. I would do anything for your aunt. She clearly values you just as much," Eleanor said. "I could tell last night how much she relies on you," James shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just do my job. This ranch has given me a place, a purpose. It is more than employment. It is home." There was something in his voice, a hint of old pain, and Eleanor found herself wanting to know more. "You mentioned your father passed when you were 18. Do you have other family?" "No," James said simply. "My mother died when I was born. My father raised me on his own, worked as a ranch hand moving from place to place. He was a good man, but he drank too much after my mother's death, trying to drown the grief, I suppose. It caught up with him eventually. When he died, I had nothing but a horse, a saddle, and the clothes on my back. I drifted for a few months, taking work where I could find it, until I ended up here. Martha gave me a chance when I had nothing to recommend me except a willingness to work hard. I will never forget that." Eleanor felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I understand something of loss. My mother died 2 years ago, a fever. My father followed her within 6 months. I think he just could not bear to be without her. They loved each other deeply. I always hoped to find something like what they had." "And did you?" James asked quietly. "Back east, I mean, was there someone you left behind?" Eleanor shook her head. "No. There were men who called, suitors my father approved of. Bankers, lawyers, merchants. Respectable, boring men who saw me as a suitable wife but never really saw me. I could not imagine spending my life having meaningless conversations over tea and pretending to be interested in whatever they deemed appropriate topics for feminine discussion. When Aunt Martha's letter came, it felt like a lifeline being thrown to a drowning woman. Does that sound dramatic?" "No," James said, and the understanding in his eyes made her heart beat faster. "It sounds honest. The West attracts people looking for something different, something more real. You fit here, Eleanor. I could see it yesterday even when you were passed out in the dirt." She laughed despite herself. "Please, can we never speak of that again? I am so mortified." "Nothing to be mortified about," James insisted, but he was smiling. "Though I admit, if you had to collapse, I am glad I was the one who found you." They rode on, and Eleanor realized with surprise that she was genuinely enjoying herself. The morning air was still relatively cool, and from horseback, she could see the strange, stark beauty of the desert landscape. The distant mountains were purple in the early light, and vegetation she had thought was simply brown proved on closer inspection to have subtle colors and textures. Birds she could not name called from the scrub brush, and once they startled a jackrabbit that bounded away in great leaps. James showed her the creek that ran along the western boundary of the property, fed by a spring higher in the hills. "This is the lifeblood of the ranch," he explained. "Without reliable water, none of this would be possible. We guard it carefully and share it with our neighbors downstream. There is an understanding out here that water rights are sacred." They stopped beside the creek and let the horses drink. James helped Eleanor dismount, and they sat on a flat rock in the shade of a cottonwood tree. The sound of the running water was peaceful, and Eleanor found herself more content than she had been in years. "Thank you for this," she said, "for taking the time to show me everything. I know you must have 100 other things you should be doing." "Nothing more important than making sure you feel welcome," James said, "and I confess I enjoy your company. It is refreshing to talk to someone new, someone who sees everything with fresh eyes. Most of us have been here so long we take it all for granted." Eleanor gathered her courage and asked, "Is there someone special in your life, James? A woman you are courting?" He looked at her, and something flickered in those gray eyes, something that made her breath catch. "No. There have been women who showed interest, and I have gone to a few dances in town, shared some dinners. But nothing ever felt right. I suppose I was waiting for something, though I did not know what." He paused, then added quietly, "Maybe I do now." The air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility, and Eleanor felt her cheeks flush though the morning was still cool. Before she could respond, James stood and offered his hand to help her up. "We should head back. You have had enough sun for one day, and Martha will have my hide if I exhaust you." The ride back was quieter but comfortable, the silence between them filled with unspoken thoughts and new awareness. When they reached the stable, James helped Eleanor dismount, his hands lingering at her waist, perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and Eleanor knew with sudden certainty that something significant had begun between them, something that would change both their lives. Over the following weeks, Eleanor threw herself into organizing the ranch's business affairs. She worked long hours in the office, creating proper ledgers, filing correspondence, and bringing order to chaos. Martha was delighted and grateful, frequently praising Eleanor's efficiency and insight. But as hard as Eleanor worked during the day, she found herself waiting for the evenings when James would return from his work, and they would all gather for dinner. James began finding excuses to stop by the office during the day, asking questions about accounts or bringing papers for her to review. Their conversations would start about business, but inevitably drift to more personal topics. He told her about his childhood, moving from ranch to ranch, never having a place to call home until Copper Ridge. She told him about Philadelphia, about the suffocating expectations and the loneliness of being always proper and never truly known. Martha noticed, of course, and said nothing, but Eleanor caught her aunt smiling knowingly more than once. Mrs. Donnelly was less subtle, making comments about what a fine man James was and how lucky some woman would be to catch his eye. Eleanor tried to remain composed, but she knew her feelings were becoming obvious to everyone. One evening about a month after her arrival, the ranch held a small celebration. One of the ranch hands, a young man named Tom, was getting married to a girl from town, and Martha insisted on hosting a party. Lanterns were strung in the courtyard, Mrs. Donnelly prepared a feast, and several neighboring ranchers came with their families. Someone produced a fiddle, and dancing began as the sun set in spectacular glory. Eleanor found herself claimed by various partners, including Diego, who was surprisingly light on his feet, and Samuel, who apologized constantly for stepping on her toes. But it was James she wanted to dance with, and finally, as a slower song began, he appeared at her elbow. "May I have this dance?" he asked, formal as any gentleman at a Philadelphia ball despite his worn work clothes and sun-darkened skin. "I thought you would never ask," Eleanor said, placing her hand in his. He led her into the dance, and Eleanor discovered that, despite his rough exterior, James danced well, guiding her smoothly through the steps. They were close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, smell the scent of soap and sage that clung to him. His hand at her waist was firm and sure, and when she looked up at him, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. "You are beautiful tonight," James said quietly, his voice barely audible over the music. "But then, you are beautiful every day. I hope it is not inappropriate for me to say so." "Not inappropriate," Eleanor whispered. "James, I need you to know these past weeks have been the happiest of my life, and it is not just the ranch or Arizona or starting fresh. It is you." The music ended, but they stood there for a moment longer, just looking at each other. Then James took her hand and led her away from the party, out past the barn to where the desert stretched dark and mysterious under a sky blazing with stars. "Eleanor," James began, then paused as though gathering courage. "I did not expect this. When you arrived, I thought I was just helping another newcomer adjust. But from that first moment when I saw you falling and caught you, something happened. Every day since, I have found myself thinking about you, looking for excuses to see you, hoping to make you smile. I know I am just a ranch foreman with nothing to my name but my horse and my wages. You could have done better back east, married someone with money and position. But I have to tell you how I feel. I am falling in love with you, Eleanor Hayes. I think I started falling the moment you opened your eyes and looked up at me." Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "James Walcott, if you think your lack of money or position matters to me, then you have not been listening when I talk. I left all that behind because it was meaningless. You are the finest man I have ever met. You are kind and strong and honest. You make me laugh and you make me feel safe. You see me for who I really am and value that, instead of trying to make me into something I am not. I am falling in love with you too. I have been since that first day, though I was too stubborn to admit it at first." James reached up and cupped her face gently with both hands. "May I kiss you?" "Please," Eleanor breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first and then deepening as she responded. It was nothing like the chaste, proper kisses she had experienced with the few men who had courted her back east. This was real and passionate and right, and when they finally drew apart, both were breathless. "Marry me," James said, resting his forehead against hers. "I know it is fast, but I am sure, Eleanor. I have never been more sure of anything. Marry me and we will build a life together here. I cannot offer you luxury, but I can promise you love and partnership and honesty. We can save up and eventually build our own place, start our own ranch maybe. I will work as hard as it takes to give you a good life." Eleanor laughed through her tears, overwhelmed with happiness. Yes, I will marry you, and I do not need luxury or a big house, I just need you. We will build our life together, whatever that looks like." They kissed again under the stars, and in the distance, the sounds of the party continued, but Eleanor and James were lost in their own world, planning and dreaming and marveling at how quickly everything had changed. When they returned to the party hand in hand, Martha took one look at their faces and smiled broadly. "Well, it is about time," she said. "I was wondering how long you two would tiptoe around each other. Congratulations, though I assume from those expressions that congratulations are in order." "We are getting married," James announced, his arm around Eleanor's waist, and a cheer went up from the assembled guests. Even those who barely knew them seemed delighted, caught up in the romance of it all. The wedding was held 6 weeks later in the small church in town. Eleanor wore a simple white dress that she and Mrs. Donnelly had sewn together, and she carried wildflowers that James had ridden out to pick himself that morning. Martha gave her away, and Diego stood up as James's best man. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, James kissed her with a tenderness that made several of the ladies in attendance sigh happily. Martha had insisted on giving them a week away from the ranch for a honeymoon. They traveled to Tucson, staying in a modest hotel and exploring the town like two children on an adventure. They talked for hours, made love with the wonder of new spouses discovering each other, and planned their future together. "I want children," Eleanor confessed one night as they lay in bed, James holding her close. "I always have, but I also want to keep working to use my mind and my skills. Is that selfish?" "Not at all," James assured her. "You are brilliant with the business side of ranching, and that is valuable work. We will figure it out together. Maybe we can hire someone to help with childcare when the time comes. Or maybe Martha will spoil any babies we have so thoroughly that they will always have someone to dote on them." He kissed her temple. "We will make it work, Eleanor. We are a team now." When they returned to Copper Ridge, they moved into a small cottage on the ranch property that had previously housed the old foreman. It was modest, just 3 rooms, but Eleanor made it a home with curtains she sewed and wildflowers she kept in jars on the windowsills. James built her a bookshelf and a writing desk, and they spent their evenings reading together or talking about their days. Eleanor continued managing the ranch's business affairs, and her organizational skills and financial acumen proved invaluable. She identified areas where money was being wasted, negotiated better prices with suppliers, and kept meticulous records that allowed Martha to make informed decisions. The ranch's profitability increased noticeably, and Martha began consulting Eleanor on major decisions alongside James. "You two are the best investments I ever made," Martha said one evening at dinner about 4 months after the wedding. "I could not run this place without you both." Life settled into a happy rhythm. James continued his work as foreman, often rising before dawn and working until dusk, but he always made time for Eleanor. They rode out together on Sunday afternoons when the ranch work was lighter, exploring the desert and the hills beyond. Eleanor learned to love the stark beauty of the land, the way the light changed throughout the day, the resilience of plants and animals that thrived in such harsh conditions. In the spring of 1884, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told James on one of their Sunday rides, waiting until they were alone by the creek where he had first suggested she belonged in Arizona. He was overcome with joy, lifting her and spinning her around carefully before setting her down and insisting they return to the ranch immediately, because she should not be riding in her condition. "James Walcott, I am pregnant, not made of glass," Eleanor laughed. "Women work ranches through their entire pregnancies out here. I am not going to break." But James was protective, almost comically so, until Eleanor had to sit him down and explain firmly that she would continue her normal activities with common-sense adjustments. Martha backed her up, amused by James's hovering, and gradually he relaxed, though he never stopped being solicitous of Eleanor's comfort and well-being. Their son was born in November of 1884, a healthy baby boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined chin. They named him Thomas after James's father, and the baby became the darling of the ranch. Everyone from Martha to the ranch hands found excuses to stop by and see young Thomas, and Mrs. Donnelly knitted enough blankets and booties to outfit triplets. Eleanor discovered that motherhood, while exhausting, filled a place in her heart she had not known was empty. She hired a young woman from town named Sarah to help with childcare during the day, so she could continue her work with the ranch accounts, finding that the arrangement worked beautifully. Sarah was grateful for the employment. Thomas was well cared for, and Eleanor could use her skills while still spending time with her son each day. When Thomas was about 6 months old, Martha called Eleanor and James to the house for a private conversation. They gathered in the parlor, and Martha regarded them both with an expression Eleanor could not quite read. "I am getting older," Martha began without preamble. "Not old yet, mind you, but I cannot run this ranch forever. I have been thinking about the future, about what happens to Copper Ridge when I am gone." She held up a hand to forestall their protests. "Let me finish. I never had children of my own. My husband and I tried, but it was not to be. This ranch was our dream together, and after he died, I poured everything into it. But a ranch is not just land and cattle, it is people, legacy, family. Eleanor, you are the closest thing to a daughter I will ever have. And James, you are like the son I never had. You both love this place and understand it. You have made it better with your work and your ideas." She paused, and Eleanor felt James take her hand, both of them silent and wondering where this was leading. "I want to make you partners," Martha said. "Equal partners with me. We will restructure the ownership so that, when I die, Copper Ridge will belong to both of you. But even before that, I want you to have a real stake, to make decisions with me, to build this place into something we can all be proud of. You have earned it 100 times over." Eleanor felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Aunt Martha, we do not expect anything. You have already given us so much." "Which is exactly why I know you will do right by this place," Martha said firmly. "You do not see it as something to exploit, but as something to nurture and grow. That is what Copper Ridge needs." "What do you say? Will you be my partners?" James looked at Eleanor, and she saw her own wonder and gratitude reflected in his eyes. Together they turned to Martha and spoke in unison. "Yes." The partnership was formalized with a lawyer in town, and the change energized everyone involved. Eleanor and James threw themselves into their work with renewed purpose, knowing they were building not just for Martha but for themselves and for Thomas. They discussed expansion, improvements, new breeding lines, and marketing strategies. Martha delighted in their enthusiasm and often said she should have made them partners years ago, though Eleanor pointed out they had only known each other for just over a year and a half. "Has it only been that long?" Martha mused. "It feels as though you have always been here." In the spring of 1886, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Martha after both grandmothers. She had Eleanor's blue eyes and James's dark hair, and her brother Thomas was fascinated by her, constantly wanting to hold her and show her his toys even though she was far too young to appreciate them. Life was full and rich and sometimes chaotic, but Eleanor had never been happier. She would often pause in her work and look around, marveling at the journey that had brought her from a stifling parlor in Philadelphia to this sun-drenched ranch where she had found purpose and love and family. One evening, when Grace was about 3 months old, Eleanor and James sat on the porch of their cottage after putting the children to bed. The sun was setting in shades of orange and red, and the desert was settling into its night rhythms. James had his arm around Eleanor, and she leaned against him contentedly. "Do you remember the day we met?" James asked. "When you collapsed in the courtyard and I thought you might be seriously ill?" Eleanor laughed. "How could I forget? I was so embarrassed. There I was, hoping to make a good first impression, and instead I ended up unconscious in the dirt." "I fell in love with you that day," James said quietly. "I know it sounds impossible, but when I was kneeling there fanning you and you opened your eyes and looked at me, something just clicked into place. I thought, there she is. The woman I have been waiting for my whole life." Eleanor turned to look at him, seeing the sincerity in his face. "I felt something too, though I was too dazed and too stubborn to recognize it right away. But by the time we rode out that first morning, I knew. I knew you were different from any man I had ever met, and I knew I wanted to spend my life with you. No regrets, James asked, about leaving Philadelphia, about the life you could have had. Not a single one, Eleanor said firmly. That was not living, James. It was existing, going through motions that had no meaning. This is living. The work, the challenges, our children, you. This is real and messy and beautiful, and I would not trade it for anything. They sat together as darkness fell and the stars emerged, brilliant against the velvet sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and closer by one of the horses whinnied softly in the stable. These were the sounds of home, as familiar now as breathing, as precious as the man beside her and the children sleeping inside. The years that followed brought changes, as all years do. The ranch continued to prosper under the three-way partnership, growing in size and reputation. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the horses and spent every moment he could with his father and Samuel, learning everything about ranching and animal husbandry. Grace proved to be a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, constantly asking questions and getting into mischief that exasperated and delighted everyone in equal measure. In 1888, Eleanor gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Daniel and William. James joked that they now had enough children to start their own ranch crew, and Eleanor retorted that if he wanted more children, he would have to carry them himself. But despite the chaos of 4 children, they managed, supported by Martha, who proved to be a devoted grandmother figure, and by Mrs. Donnelly and Sarah and the extended family that the ranch had become. Martha's health began to fail gradually in the early 1890s. She never complained, remaining active and engaged in ranch decisions as long as she could, but it was clear to everyone who loved her that she was slowing down. In the spring of 1893, she called Eleanor and James to her room one morning before sunrise. "It is time," she said simply. "I can feel it. Do not fuss or cry or try to talk me out of it. I have had a good life, better than I had any right to expect. I built something that mattered, and I am leaving it in the best possible hands. I got to see you 2 fall in love, watched your babies grow. I am content, my dears, more than content. I am grateful." Eleanor did cry, despite Martha's instructions, and James's eyes were suspiciously bright. They sat with Martha through the day as her breathing grew shallower and the light in her eyes began to dim. At sunset, with Eleanor holding one hand and James holding the other, Martha Hayes passed peacefully from the world, a small smile on her face. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects. Martha had been a fixture in the community, respected by competitors and beloved by friends. Eleanor and James stood together accepting condolences. Their children gathered around them and felt the weight of legacy settle on their shoulders. Copper Ridge Ranch was theirs now, fully and completely, and they were determined to honor Martha's memory by making it thrive. They succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, including their own. The horse breeding program became renowned throughout the territory, with buyers coming from as far as California and Texas to purchase Copper Ridge horses. The cattle operation remained strong and profitable. Eleanor's management of the business side ensured they navigated economic downturns and market fluctuations better than most ranches. James's leadership kept the workforce loyal and motivated, and together they created a culture at Copper Ridge that valued hard work, fairness, and innovation. Their children grew up with the ranch in their blood. Thomas took naturally to the ranching life, and by his late teens was working alongside his father, clearly destined to take over operations someday. Grace surprised everyone by showing a brilliant head for numbers and business strategy, effectively apprenticing with her mother and bringing fresh ideas to the enterprise. The twins, Daniel and William, were inseparable and equally obsessed with horses, working with Samuel's son who had taken over the breeding program. In the summer of 1903, Eleanor and James celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their hair was touched with gray now, their faces lined by sun and wind and laughter, but their love had only deepened with time. They threw a party at the ranch, inviting everyone they knew, and as evening fell and people danced in the courtyard just as they had on the night James proposed, Eleanor pulled her husband aside. "Do you remember what you promised me?" she asked, "that night under the stars?" "I promised you many things," James said, smiling. "Love, partnership, honesty, a life built together." "Which one are you thinking of?" "You promised me that we would make it work, whatever came, that we were a team, and we did, James. We built something amazing together, not just the ranch but our family, our life. You kept every promise you ever made to me." James pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "It was the easiest thing in the world because you were with me. Everything good in my life started the day you fainted in that courtyard, and I got to be the one who caught you." Eleanor laughed, the sound as bright and joyful as it had been 20 years earlier. "Well then, I suppose fainting was the best decision I ever made." They danced together as the stars came out, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, surrounded by the family and community they had built, on the land they loved and had nurtured for decades. Thomas danced with his sweetheart, a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and Eleanor whispered to James that they would likely be planning another wedding soon. Grace was deep in conversation with a young lawyer from town about water rights and land management. The twins were making the younger children laugh with some prank involving a frog. This was the life Eleanor had dreamed of without knowing she was dreaming it. Purpose, love, family, a place where she belonged absolutely and without question. She had traveled across the country to a harsh, unforgiving land, had literally collapsed under the weight of it all on her first day, and had found everything she never knew she needed in the gray eyes and gentle hands of a cowboy who believed she belonged here from the very beginning. As the years continued to pass, Eleanor and James grew old together with the grace that comes from a life well lived. They eventually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch, though they remained involved and interested until the very end. Thomas took over as primary operator with Grace managing the business side, a partnership that mirrored their parents and proved just as successful. The twins expanded the horse breeding operation into new territory. The ranch they had built together continued to thrive, passed down through generations, a testament to vision, hard work, and love. Eleanor lived to the age of 87, sharp-minded and strong-willed to the last. James followed her 18 months later, at 88, having told his children he had no interest in staying in a world that did not have Eleanor in it. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking Copper Ridge Ranch, with markers that identified them as beloved partners in life and work, devoted parents and grandparents, and founders of something that endured. Years later, their great-grandchildren would play in the shade of the cottonwood by the creek, and someone would always tell the story of how it all began. How their great-grandmother Eleanor had traveled west alone and fainted from the heat on her first day at the ranch. How their great-grandfather James had fanned her with his hat and brought her water. How that moment of crisis and kindness had sparked a love story that shaped all their lives. The desert still stretched vast and harsh under the burning sun, and the ranch still stood strong against it, built on the foundation of two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and built something that would last long after they were gone. The land remembered them in the trees they had planted, the buildings they had raised, the systems they had created. But more than that, they were remembered in the values they had instilled, the love they had modeled, The proof they had offered that sometimes falling down is exactly what you need to do to find the person who will help you back up and never let you go again. And on certain summer evenings when the heat was particularly fierce, and the sky blazed with stars, ranch hands swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand through the desert. A young woman with determination in her eyes and a cowboy with a gentle smile. Forever 22 and 25. Forever finding each other for the first time, forever beginning the greatest adventure of their lives.